Commander Vextal stood on the bridge of his warship, watching the stars bend and twist as they traveled through space. His 4 eyes scanned the display screens with practiced ease. He had done this many times before. 47 star systems had fallen to the Kryn Empire under his command. 47 victories without a single real challenge. Today would be number 48. "Commander," his second officer called out. "We are receiving distress signals from the nearby sector." Vextal's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his kind. Distress signals meant weakness. Weakness meant easy conquest. "Show me," he ordered. The main screen flickered to life. A damaged ship floated in the black void of space, trailing debris and frozen air. The vessel was smaller than his flagship, perhaps 1/3 the size. Its hull was scarred with burns and punctures. Whatever had damaged it had done so badly. "Analysis," Vextal demanded. "Unknown species, Commander. Our database has no record of their kind. The ship appears to be a colony vessel. We detect approximately 200 life forms aboard. Their weapon systems are minimal. Hull integrity is at 40%. Vextal leaned forward in his command chair. A new species. Fresh territory. And they were already wounded. The universe had gifted him another easy victory. "What do they call themselves?" he asked. The communications officer worked his console for a moment. "The distress signal identifies them as humans. The ship is called the New Dawn. Humans." Vextal tested the word in his mind. It sounded soft, weak. "Bring up their biological data." The screen changed to show a 3-dimensional image of a human body. Vextal studied it with growing amusement. These creatures stood on 2 legs like the Kryn. But there the similarities ended. They had no natural armor plating. No claws or talons. Their bone structure was fragile compared to his own people. They had only 2 eyes. Their muscles appeared weak. "They are colonists," his science officer reported. "Families, engineers, farmers." The ship was heading to establish a new settlement when it encountered a meteor storm. Their defensive shields failed. "Families?" Vextal's mandibles clicked again. "Even better. They will surrender quickly to protect their young." He stood from his chair, his tall frame casting a shadow across the bridge. The Kryn were warriors. Bred for conquest, they stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick armored skin that could deflect small arms fire. 4 powerful arms ending in razor-sharp claws. A warrior race that had never met its match. And now they faced soft-skinned colonists. "Prepare a boarding party," Vextal ordered. 20 soldiers should be sufficient. We will take their ship, claim their technology, and add this species to our empire's catalog of conquered races. "Should we offer terms of surrender first, Commander?" his second officer asked. Vextal waved one of his clawed hands dismissively. "Why waste time? Look at them. They are barely worth the effort of a full assault. Send the boarding party. If they resist, kill enough to make the others compliant. Standard procedure." The bridge crew moved with efficient precision. This was routine. They had done it dozens of times before. Within minutes, the boarding craft detached from the flagship. 20 Kryn warriors, each armed with plasma rifles and armored in combat gear, made their way toward the damaged colony ship. Vextal watched from his command chair, already composing the victory report he would send back to the Empire. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission from the human vessel," the communications officer announced. "Put it through." A face appeared on the screen. Human, male, dark hair, dark eyes, and a face marked with dirt and dried blood. But there was something in those eyes that gave Vextal pause. Not fear, not panic, something else. "This is Captain Tay of the New Dawn," the human said. His voice was steady despite the chaos visible behind him. Sparks fell from damaged ceiling panels. Smoke drifted through the corridor. "We've detected your approach. We are civilians in need of assistance, not your enemies." Vextal laughed, a harsh clicking sound. "You are whatever we decide you are, Captain Tay. Prepare to be boarded. If you cooperate, Your deaths will be quick. The human's expression didn't change. He simply stared at Vexital for a long moment. Then he spoke again. You're making a mistake. The only mistake here is yours, Vexital replied. You should have stayed in your own space. Captain Tay glanced to his left, seemed to receive a nod from someone off-screen, then looked back at Vexital. So be it. But remember this moment. Commander, remember that you chose this. The transmission ended. Vexital felt a flicker of something uncomfortable. The human hadn't begged, hadn't pleaded, hadn't even seemed afraid. But he pushed the feeling aside. Fear was for prey, and the Kryn were predators. Boarding party has docked with the human vessel, his tactical officer reported. They are cutting through the airlock now. Vexital watched the video feed from the soldiers' helmet cameras. The cutting torches burned bright against the sealed door. Metal glowed red, then white, then fell away with a shower of sparks. The boarding party moved into the darkness beyond. Atmosphere is breathable, one soldier reported. Gravity is slightly lower than ours. Ship appears empty in this section. Advance, Vexital ordered. Find the command deck. Capture their leaders. The soldiers moved through the corridor in formation. Emergency lights flickered red in the smoke-filled passages. The ship creaked and groaned around them. Somewhere in the distance, alarms wailed. Too quiet, one soldier muttered over the comm. Vexital was about to reprimand him for breaking protocol when the first explosion ripped through the corridor. The helmet camera spun wildly, showing glimpses of fire, flying debris, and soldiers thrown against the walls. Screams filled the comm channel. Then one camera went dark. Then another. Report, Vexital shouted, rising from his chair. Ambush, a soldier's voice crackled through static. They mined the corridor. We have casualties. Return fire, Vexital ordered. At what? We can't see them. They're in the walls. In the ceiling. More gunfire. More screams. More cameras going dark. Vexital stared at the chaos unfolding on his screens. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Colonists didn't fight back. Families didn't set ambushes. Weak species didn't. A calm voice cut through the noise on the comm channel. A human voice. Day to all sections. They've taken the bait. Seal bulkheads 7 through 12. Vent atmosphere on my mark. Vent atmosphere on my mark. Who is that? Vexital demanded. Who is speaking? The video feed from his remaining soldiers showed them retreating, firing blindly into the shadows. Then the corridor doors slammed shut in front of them. Behind them. Trapping them. No, no, no. A Kryn soldier's voice rose in panic. The last thing Vexital saw before the cameras died was the corridors opening to space, and his warriors being pulled into the void. Commander Vexital stood frozen on his bridge, staring at the dead screens. Somewhere in the darkness of that damaged colony ship, the humans were waiting. Vexital's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. The screens before him showed nothing but static. 12 of his warriors, gone. Just like that. Restore communications with the boarding party, he ordered, his voice tight. We're trying, Commander, the communications officer replied. But there's interference. Wait. We're getting something. A crackling voice came through the speakers. One of his soldiers. This is squad leader Riex. We're trapped in Section 4. 8 warriors dead. The rest of us are sealed in a cargo bay. The humans. They're not fighting like we expected. What do you mean? Vexital demanded. They're using the ship itself as a weapon. They vented 3 corridors to space. They've turned off the gravity in some sections and made it too strong in others. They've electrified the handrails. They're moving through maintenance shafts we didn't know existed. Commander, these aren't soldiers. The one leading the defense identified herself as a security officer, just one security officer and a handful of crew members. But they're fighting like... The transmission cut to static. Vexital felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had conquered 47 worlds. He had faced trained military forces, armed resistance groups, even warrior cultures. But he had never lost warriors to colonists, to families and farmers. Send more troops, he ordered. 100 soldiers this time. Full combat gear. I want that ship taken now. His second officer hesitated. Commander, perhaps we should reconsider. We could simply destroy their vessel from here. No. Vextal's pride wouldn't allow it. We are Kryn. We do not flee from inferior beings. Send. The second wave launched. Vextal watched as 100 of his finest warriors made their way to the human ship. This time, he had them enter from multiple points. This time, they moved with caution. But caution meant nothing when the enemy refused to play by the rules. The humans appeared and disappeared like ghosts. A figure would emerge from a vent shaft, fire a weapon, and vanish before the Kryn could respond. Explosives would detonate in empty corridors, bringing down walls and ceilings. The very air seemed to work against them, as humans vented oxygen from one section while pumping it into another, creating walls of fire that burned with impossible intensity. Vextal watched one of his soldiers chase a small human female around a corner. The warrior was twice her size, armored and armed. She was limping, leaving a trail of blue blood behind her. An easy target. The soldier raised his weapon. The human turned, and Vextal saw her face clearly on the camera. Young, afraid, but determined, she pressed something on the wall. The floor beneath the Kryn soldier exploded upward. Not a bomb. The humans had rigged the ship's maintenance systems. Hydraulic fluid sprayed everywhere under high pressure. The warrior stumbled back, blinded and disoriented. The human woman didn't run. She grabbed a piece of broken metal from the debris and attacked. Actually attacked. A creature that couldn't weigh more than half of what a Kryn weighed, injured and barely armed, threw herself at a fully equipped warrior. Vextal heard other voices over the comm. Human voices. Calm. And coordinated. Hana here. Eastern corridor is sealed. They're funneling toward the central junction. Copy that. J1. Are the charges ready? Ready. Just get them into position. Day. We have wounded in Section 9. Yuna and Bora are holding the position, but they need support. On my way. They were using names. They knew each other. This wasn't a military unit following orders. This was a community protecting itself, and they were winning. Vextal watched as the humans executed their plan with brutal efficiency. They lured his soldiers into the central junction, a large cargo area. The Kryn warriors thought they finally had the advantage. Open space, clear sight lines, no ambush points. They were wrong. The humans had turned the cargo containers into a maze. They had positioned makeshift barriers. They had set up crossfire positions, and when the Kryn soldiers entered, thinking they had the humans trapped, the doors sealed behind them. Lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in blood-red shadows. Above them, a Kryn warrior shouted. Vextal watched in disbelief as humans dropped from the ceiling on cables made from their own safety lines. They were diving toward armed warriors, toward certain death. But they weren't trying to survive. They were buying time. One human, a male that Vextal heard called Sok, crashed into a Kryn soldier with such force that both went down. The human had no weapon except a wrench. He used it. Again and again, not with skill, not with training, just with desperate determination. Other humans fired from behind the containers. Their weapons were barely military grade. Some were using mining tools. Construction equipment. One woman was throwing containers of some chemical that exploded on impact. Fall back, a Kryn squad leader ordered. This is suicide. Fall back. But the humans had welded the doors shut. Vextal felt his hearts racing, all three of them pounding in his chest. This couldn't be happening. These were colonists, civilians. Where had they learned to fight like this? Commander, his science officer spoke up quietly. I've been analyzing their behavior. I accessed their data files from the ship's computer before they encrypted them. I found historical records. I don't care about their history, Vextal snapped. I care about taking that ship. Sir, I think you should see this. The science officer transferred data to Vextal's personal screen, files and files of information, Human history, wars, thousands of years of wars, humans fighting humans, weapons that could destroy entire cities, tactics that made Kryn combat doctrine look gentle by comparison. They call it World War I, the science officer said. Then World War II. Then dozens of smaller conflicts. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Syria. They've been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. Commander, these aren't a peaceful species that we're bullying. These are predators who learn to cooperate. Vexistal stared at the records. At the numbers. Millions dead in single conflicts. Billions spent on weapons. Entire generations trained in warfare. But they're colonists, he said weakly. Not soldiers. Not soldiers. On Earth, their home world, they have a saying, the science officer continued. It is not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. Commander, we attacked their families. We threatened their children. We made them choose between surrender and survival. And they chose survival, Vextal finished. An alarm blared across the bridge. Vexistal looked up at the main screen. The human colony ship was moving. Thrusters that shouldn't have had any power were firing. The damaged vessel, which should have been dead in space, was accelerating, directly toward his flagship. Evasive maneuvers, Vextal shouted. They're too close. We can't move fast enough. Vexistal watched in horror as the New Dawn, trailing fire and debris, crashed into his ship's docking bay. Metal screamed. Hull plates buckled. Alarms rang throughout the flagship, and then the humans came pouring out of their ruined vessel. There couldn't have been more than 40 of them left, 40 out of 200, but they came out fighting. They had scavenged weapons from the dead Kryn soldiers. They moved like they had nothing left to lose. Because they didn't. Vextal saw Captain Tay leading them. The human was covered in blood, one arm hanging useless at his side. But he was still giving orders. Still coordinating his people. All sections, Tay's voice came over the stolen Kryn comm units. Remember what we're fighting for. Remember why we don't stop. And behind them, still attached to the flagship by the crash, the colony ship's reactor began to glow with dangerous light. A young human voice came over the general frequency. This is Hyun in engineering. Reactor overload initiated. You have 15 minutes to evacuate. Maybe less. I'm not really sure. I've never blown up a fusion reactor before. The voice was shaking. Scared, but determined. Vexal realized, with growing terror, what the humans had done. They had turned their entire ship into a bomb. They were willing to die, all of them, just to take the Kryn flagship with them. Commander, his second officer said quietly, what are your orders? Vexistal had no answer. For the first time in his career, he simply had no answer. The Kryn flagship shuddered as another explosion ripped through the lower decks. Vexistal gripped his command chair, feeling the structure of his mighty warship groan under the strain. Through the view screen, he could see the twisted wreckage of the human colony ship embedded in his docking bay like a parasite. 14 minutes until reactor breach. A calm voice announced over the general frequency. The human called Hyun. He sounded almost apologetic. Sorry about this. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. They were about to die. And the human was apologizing. Security teams report human combatants on decks 7 through 12, his tactical officer reported. They're pushing toward the bridge. How many? Vextal demanded. 43 humans, Commander. But they're fighting like what? Vextal snapped. The tactical officer looked at him with all four eyes wide. Like they're already dead, sir. They're not trying to survive. They're just trying to kill as many of us as possible before the reactor goes. Vextal pulled up the security feeds. He saw humans moving through his ship in small groups. They were wounded, exhausted. Some could barely walk, but they kept moving forward. He watched a human female, identified in his database as Sora, dragging another injured human behind her. She had a medical kit strapped to her back. When Kryn soldiers appeared, She set her patient down gently, picked up a rifle, and fired back. Not with the smooth precision of a soldier, but with something worse. Pure determination. She took 3 hits. Her body jerked with each impact. But she stayed upright long enough to pull her patient into cover. Only then did she collapse. But 2 more humans appeared, grabbed both Sora and the patient, and continued moving. They didn't leave their wounded behind. They didn't leave their dead behind. They carried everyone. "Commander," his second officer said urgently, "we need to abandon ship. Now." Vexetl wanted to argue. Wanted to order his warriors to push back, to reclaim his flagship, to show these primitive beings the true might of the Kryn Empire. But he couldn't ignore the countdown. 13 minutes. All hands. "Abandon ship," he ordered. The words tasted like poison in his mouth. "Evacuate to the support vessels." Everty, as his crew scrambled to escape pods and shuttlecraft. Vexetl couldn't stop watching the security feeds. He saw Captain Tay, moving slowly, his ruined arm now tied against his chest. The human captain stopped at an intersection, checking on his people as they passed. "Keep moving," Tay said to each group. "Stay together. Watch each other's backs." "Captain," a young human male said, "the reactor's going to—" "I know, Junho," Tay replied. "We all know. But we're taking as many of them with us as we can." "My family was on the ship," Junho continued. "My daughter. She was only 6. Tay put his good hand on the young man's shoulder. Said nothing. Just stood there for a moment. Then they kept moving. Vexetl felt something crack inside his chest. These humans had lost everything. Their homes, their families, their future. And yet they fought on. Not for victory. Just for vengeance. Just to make the Kryn hurt as much as they were hurting. 10 minutes, Hyun's voice announced. Vexetl made his way to the escape pods, but he couldn't stop himself from accessing the ship's computer one more time. He pulled up the human data files. The ones his science officer had found earlier. He read about human wars. About cities burned to ash. About weapons so terrible that humans had agreed never to use them again. And then had used them anyway when desperate enough. He read about something called the Battle of Stalingrad, where humans fought house by house, room by room, for months in the ruins of their own city. He read about a concept called scorched earth. The idea of destroying everything, even your own territory, rather than let your enemy have it. He read about a human saying, "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me," and he finally understood. These humans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to make sure the Kryn lost too. "Commander," a voice shouted. "You need to evacuate now." Vexetl stumbled toward the escape pod bay. Around him, his crew was panicking. Proud Kryn warriors, who had conquered dozens of worlds, were running in fear from a handful of dying humans. As he reached his personal escape pod, a hologram flickered to life in front of him. A human face. Female. Short dark hair matted with blood and sweat. She was smiling, but there was no humor in it. "Commander Vexetl," the human said. "My name is Hana. I'm the tactical coordinator for the New Dawn. Or I was. Before you decided to attack us." "What do you want?" Vexetl asked. "I want you to remember this moment," Hana said. "I want you to remember that you attacked a civilian ship. You killed families. Children. People who never wanted to fight anyone. You're going to die in 8 minutes, Vexetl said. "What does any of this matter?" Hana's smile grew colder. "Because we're not going to die alone. And because I've already transmitted everything about this encounter to human space. The recordings. The ship logs. Everything. A colonial defense fleet will be here in 5 days. Maybe less. There's nothing here for them to defend," Vexetl said. "You'll all be dead. We'll be gone." "True," Hana agreed. "But they'll come anyway. Because that's what humans do. We remember. We mourn. And we make absolutely sure that whoever hurt our people understands they made a terrible mistake. You're bluffing, Vextal said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Hana tilted her head. You've read our history by now. I know you have. You've seen what humans do to each other when we fight. Now imagine what we'll do to you, to the species that killed our children. The hologram flickered, starting to destabilize. Wait, Vextal said suddenly. Wait. Let me speak with Captain Tay. Let me negotiate. Surrender. Terms. Something. Hana laughed. Actually laughed. Now you want to talk? Now you want to negotiate? Where was this attitude when we sent our distress signal? When we asked for help? When we tried to talk before you boarded us? I can offer you safe passage, Vextal said desperately. Medical aid. Sanctuary. Just shut down the reactor. Please. 6 minutes, Hyun's voice echoed in the background. Hana looked off camera, seemed to be listening to something. Then she looked back at Vexistal. Captain Tay says he'll consider your offer, on one condition. Anything, Vextal said. Let the civilian ships go. All of them. Every Kryn vessel that doesn't have weapons. Escape pods, shuttles, medical ships. Let them all leave the system safely, and we'll disarm the reactor. Vexistal felt a surge of hope. Done. I agree. You have my word. The word of someone who attacks refugees? Hana said. But fine. We don't have much choice, do we? Tell Hyun to shut down the reactor, Vextal ordered. Now. Already doing it, Hana replied. But Commander? Remember what I said. 5 days. The Colonial Defense Fleet will be here. And they won't be colonists. They won't be civilians. What will they be? Vextal asked. Though he dreaded the answer, Hana's expression turned ice cold. Angry. The hologram vanished. Vexistal stood in the corridor, listening to the countdown stop at 3 minutes and 42 seconds. Around him, his crew continued evacuating. He should have felt relief. He should have felt victorious. He'd negotiated a survival for his people. Instead, he felt the cold grip of real fear for the first time in his life. Because somewhere in the darkness of space, the human military was coming. And unlike the desperate colonists, they would be trained, armed, prepared, and according to Hana, they would be angry. Vexistal made his way to his command ship, one of the few warships left undamaged. As they pulled away from the crippled flagship, he pulled up more human files. More history. He needed to know what was coming. What he found made his 3 hearts freeze. Humans didn't just have a military. They had multiple militaries. Armies, navies, air forces, marines, special forces, and according to their records, humans spent more on warfare than most species spent on their entire civilizations. The Colonial Defense Fleet was just one branch, and it was considered the peaceful one. Commander, his pilot said. Where should we go? Where should we go? Vexistal looked at the damaged human ship, seeing the small figures of survivors limping back to their ruined vessel. 23 humans left. That's all. 23 out of 200, and they had brought his entire flagship to its knees. Home, Vextal said quietly. We're going home. And we're never coming back to this region of space again. But sir, the Empire will expect us to. The Empire can send someone else, Vextal interrupted. I'm done with humans. 4 days passed. 4 days of Vexistal watching the void of space from his command ship, waiting for the promised human fleet to arrive. His crew was on edge. Even the most battle-hardened Kryn warriors jumped at shadows. They should have left. Should have run far and fast from this cursed sector. But something kept them here. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was denial. Perhaps Vexistal simply needed to see if Hana had been telling the truth. On the morning of the 4th day, the sensors went mad. Multiple contacts, the sensor officer shouted. Dropping out of FTL. 50, 60, 70 ships and counting. The main screen filled with vessels. Human vessels. Some were massive carriers that dwarfed even Kryn battleships. Others were sleek destroyer-class ships that moved with predatory grace. And at the center of the formation, a flagship that made Vexistal's ruined command ship look like a toy. But that wasn't what made Vexistal's blood run cold. The first ships to arrive weren't warships. They were medical vessels, hospital ships with bright markings, rescue craft. They moved straight toward the drifting wreckage of the new dawn, completely ignoring the Kryn fleet. Are they not going to attack? His tactical officer asked in confusion. Vexital watched as the rescue ships surrounded the broken colony vessel. Small craft detached, moving carefully through the debris field. They were searching for survivors, not preparing for battle, not positioning for assault, searching for their people. They're prioritizing their wounded, Vextal said quietly. Even now, it took 2 hours. 2 hours of tense silence as the Kryn fleet watched the humans extract survivors from the new dawn. Vexistal saw the medical ships receiving the colonists, one by one. 23 had survived. He watched all 23 being taken aboard, treated, protected. Only then did the warships move into position. A transmission came through. The screen showed a human male, older than the colonists had been. His hair was gray at the temples. He wore a dark uniform covered in medals and insignia, but it was his eyes that made Vextal uncomfortable. Cold eyes, measuring eyes. "I am Admiral Quan of the Human Colonial Defense Fleet," the man said. His voice was calm. Too calm. "You attacked the civilian vessel New Dawn. You killed 177 colonists. You wounded 23 more. We were not aware they were civilians," Vextal started to say. "You were told," Admiral Quan interrupted. Captain Tay identified his vessel as a colony ship. He asked for help. You responded by boarding his ship with armed soldiers. Those are acts of piracy and mass murder by any civilized standard. Vexistal felt his mandibles click nervously. "There was a misunderstanding. We have agreed to compensation. We have allowed survivors to. You will surrender immediately," Admiral Quan said. "All Kryn vessels will power down weapons, disable engines, and prepare to be boarded. You will face trial for war crimes." War crimes? Vextal's pride flared, despite his fear. "We are the Kryn Empire. We do not surrender to inferior." "Commander Vextal," Admiral Quan said, and something in his tone made Vextal stop talking. "I am going to explain something to you very clearly. You attacked civilian refugees. You killed children. We have the ship logs, we have the recordings, we have survivor testimony. Under the laws of the Human Coalition, these are war crimes. You will surrender, or we will make you surrender. Choose now." Vexistal looked at his tactical display. 150 Kryn warships versus 70 human ships. The numbers favored the Kryn. "If you refuse," Vextal said, trying to sound confident, "you will lose. We outnumber you. Our weapons technology is superior. Your ships will." "Tactical demonstration authorized," Admiral Quan said, not to Vextal, but to someone off-screen. What happened next would haunt Vextal for the rest of his life. 20 human ships, just 20, broke formation. They accelerated toward the Kryn fleet's right flank, moving in a pattern that seemed almost like a dance. The Kryn ships in that section powered up their weapons, preparing to engage. The human ships didn't slow down. They didn't even fire back immediately. They just kept coming, weaving through Kryn weapons fire with impossible precision. Then they fired. The weapons weren't like anything Vextal had seen before. Not lasers. Not plasma. Something else. The projectiles moved at incredible speeds. And when they hit, entire Kryn ships simply stopped working. Power systems failed. Engines went dark. Life support shut down. In 30 seconds, 12 Kryn warships were dead in space, and the human ships hadn't even slowed down. "Those are kinetic mass drivers," Admiral Quan explained, as if teaching a lesson. "Very simple technology. We fire small objects at very high speeds. When they hit your ships at that velocity, they disrupt every electronic system you have. Your crews are alive. They're just helpless. The human ships circled back to their original position. Undamaged. Unchallenged. We have 60 more ships that haven't fired yet, Admiral Kwan continued. And unlike your empire, Commander, humans don't fight for glory or conquest. We fight to win. Efficiently. Completely. We spent thousands of years learning how to kill each other. Now we're very, very good at it. Vexatal stared at his tactical display. 12 ships disabled in half a minute, and the humans had barely tried. If we surrender, Vextal said slowly, what happens to us? You'll be held in a detention facility until your trial, Admiral Kwan said. You'll be treated humanely. Fed. Given medical care. Legal representation. But you will answer for what you've done. And if we fight? Admiral Kwan's expression didn't change. Then we'll disable every ship in your fleet, board them by force, and take you prisoner anyway. The only difference is how many of your crew die first. Your choice, Commander. Vexostal looked around his bridge. His crew stared back at him, waiting for orders. Proud Kryn warriors who had conquered worlds. Now they looked scared. Because they had seen what the humans could do. And these weren't desperate colonists fighting for survival. These were trained soldiers with advanced weapons and decades of military doctrine behind them. Stand down, Vextal ordered quietly. Power down weapons. Disable engines. Prepare to be boarded. His crew hesitated for only a moment before obeying. Around them, the rest of the Kryn fleet did the same. 150 warships. Surrendering, without firing a shot. It took 6 hours for the humans to board every Kryn ship. Vexatal watched as teams of human marines moved through his vessel with professional efficiency. They weren't cruel. They weren't even angry. At least not visibly. They just processed everyone systematically. A human officer entered the bridge. Female. Young. She carried a rifle, but it was pointed at the ground. She looked at Vextal with an expression he couldn't read. Commander Vextal? She asked. Yes. I'm Captain G1. I'm placing you under arrest for war crimes. Please come with me. Vextal stood slowly. What happens now? Now you face justice, G1 said simply. You'll be taken to a human facility. You'll be given food, water, medical care if needed. You'll have access to legal counsel. You'll be treated according to the laws of the human coalition. Even though we killed your people? Vextal asked. Even though, G1 confirmed. Because we're not monsters, Commander. We're humans. We have rules. Laws. We follow them even when we're angry. Especially when we're angry. That's what separates us from you. As Vexatal was led through his own ship, now occupied by human marines, he saw his crew being processed. They were being separated into groups, checked for injuries, given water and basic supplies. The humans weren't treating them as enemies. They were treating them as prisoners of war. With all the dignity that implied. In the hangar bay, Vextal saw something that made him stop. A group of human medical personnel was treating a Kryn soldier who had been injured in the initial demonstration. They were carefully setting his broken limb, administering pain medication, monitoring his vital signs. Why are you helping him? Vextal asked Captain G1. Because he's wounded and we're medics, she replied, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. We don't let people suffer just because we're at war with them. What kind of species would that make us? Vextal had no answer. As the transport ship carried him away from his fleet, away from his command, away from everything he had known, Vextal looked out the viewport. He could see the wreckage of the New Dawn, still floating in space. A testament to human determination, human sacrifice, human rage, but he could also see the hospital ships still tending to the survivors. Human compassion, human mercy, human rules. And he realized, with absolute clarity, that he had never truly understood fear until this moment. Because the humans were right. They weren't monsters. They were something far more terrifying. They were controlled, disciplined. They could be ruthless in battle, but merciful in victory. They could kill with brutal efficiency, but they chose not to when the fighting stopped. That was true power. And it scared him more than any weapon ever could. The human detention facility was not what Vexatal had expected. He had imagined torture chambers, dark cells, cruel guards. Instead, he found clean rooms with beds, regular meals, and medical staff who checked on him daily. He even had access to a computer terminal, though it was limited to educational materials and communication with his legal counsel. It was almost worse than torture, because it forced him to think. For 3 weeks, Vexistal sat in his cell and read. The humans had given him access to their history, their culture, their laws. They wanted him to understand exactly what he had done and why he was being held accountable. He read about the Geneva Conventions, human rules for warfare, written after particularly terrible wars, rules about not attacking civilians, about treating prisoners humanely, about protecting the wounded, rules that humans had created to limit their own capacity for destruction. He read about the Nuremberg trials, where humans had held other humans accountable for war crimes. The phrase, just following orders, was not considered a valid defense. Personal responsibility mattered to humans. He read about human philosophy, about concepts like mercy, justice, redemption, about the difference between revenge and accountability. And slowly, Vexistal began to understand what had happened in that encounter with the New Dawn. The colonists hadn't fought with hatred. They had fought with desperation, with love for each other, with a primal need to protect their families. Every ambush, every trap, every sacrifice had been an act of defense, not aggression. But the humans who had arrested him? They had fought with something different. They had fought with discipline, with rules, with the controlled application of force. They could have destroyed the entire Kryn fleet in minutes. But they had chosen to disable rather than destroy, to capture rather than kill. That was the difference. On the day of his preliminary hearing, Vexistal was escorted to a courtroom. The room was formal but not intimidating. There were human observers, legal representatives, and a panel of judges from various human colonies. And in the corner, behind a protective barrier, sat some of the survivors from the New Dawn. Vexistal saw Captain Tay, his arm still in a cast but his eyes clear and alert. He saw Hana, using a walking aid but present nonetheless. He saw Day, the security officer who had orchestrated the defense, sitting with quiet dignity. And he saw others. Yuna, Bora, Sok, Junho, whose daughter had died. They were all there to witness what came next. The lead judge, a human female named Administrator Park, looked at Vexistal with the same measuring expression he was coming to recognize in humans. Not hatred, just assessment. Commander Vexistal, she began. You stand accused of attacking a civilian vessel, resulting in the deaths of 177 colonists, including 42 children. You also stand accused of attempting to conquer a colony ship through military force. How do you respond to these charges? Number 4. Vexistal's legal counsel, a human who had been assigned to him, leaned over to whisper advice, but Vexistal held up one of his 4 hands. I would like to speak, he said. Administrator Park nodded. You may. Vexistal stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. I am guilty, he said simply. I attacked the New Dawn. I ordered my soldiers to board their ship. I underestimated them because they were civilians. Because they appeared weak. Because I had conquered 47 worlds, and none had ever fought back like they did. There was silence in the courtroom. I did not know about your rules for warfare, Vexistal continued. In the Kryn Empire, might makes right. The strong conquer the weak. That is how we have always existed. But I understand now that humans are different. You have rules. You have laws. You have codes of conduct even in war. He turned to look at the survivors. I also understand that the people I attacked were not weak. They were the strongest beings I have ever encountered. Because they fought not for conquest, but for love, for family, for each other. 23 survivors fought my entire fleet to a standstill. Not because they were trained, but because they refused to give up. Captain Tay's expression didn't change. But Vexistal saw something flicker in his eyes. Acknowledgement, perhaps. Or simply the weariness of someone who had paid too high a price for victory. I have spent these weeks reading your history, Vextal said. Learning about your species. And I have realized something. The second I understood what fear truly is, was not when your military arrived. It was not when your Admiral Quan disabled my ships. It was in that moment, on my bridge, watching colonists fight back, and realizing that humans are capable of both terrible violence and tremendous mercy. He paused, searching for the right words in this strange human language. You scare me, he said finally. Not because you are cruel, but because you are not. You could have destroyed us. You could have killed every Kryn in that fleet. We would have deserved it. But you chose not to. You chose to follow your rules, your laws. Even when you were angry. Even when we had hurt you. And, Administrator Park leaned forward slightly. Are you saying you're afraid of human restraint? Yes, Vextal said. Because it means you are in complete control. You know exactly how dangerous you are. And you choose not to use that danger unless necessary. That is true power. The Kryn conquer because we can. Humans conquer only when they must. And when you must, you do so with devastating efficiency. He sat down slowly. I accept whatever judgment this court decides. I will not appeal. I will not fight. Because I have learned that fighting humans is a losing proposition. Not because you are stronger, but because you are smarter. You have turned warfare into a science while never losing your humanity. And that makes you the most dangerous species I have ever encountered. The preliminary hearing continued for several hours. Testimony was given. Evidence was presented. Vextal listened to recordings of his own words. Ordering the attack. Watched video of his soldiers boarding the New Dawn. Heard the death count read aloud. Each name was spoken. Each colonist who had died was given voice. Not as a statistic, but as an individual. Junho's daughter, Nari, age 6, who had loved drawing pictures of stars. Bora's husband, Minsok, who had been a teacher. Siok's parents, both engineers who had helped design the colony ship. By the end, Vexistal understood. These weren't just casualties of war. They were people. Individuals with names and families and dreams. And he had killed them. When the hearing ended, Administrator Park delivered her judgment. Commander Vextal, you will stand trial in 60 days. Given your confession and cooperation, this court will recommend a sentence of imprisonment rather than execution. You will serve time proportional to your crimes, with the possibility of parole after demonstrating genuine rehabilitation and understanding of human law. I understand, Vextal said. As he was being led from the courtroom, Captain Tay stood up. Commander, he called out. Vexistal stopped, turned. Tay limped forward, his injured arm still bound. He stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The Kryn commander who had ordered the attack, the human captain who had defended his people. My daughter was on that ship, Tay said quietly. Her name was Unji. She was 9 years old. She wanted to be a pilot. Vextal felt something break inside him. I am sorry, he said, and meant it. I know, Tay replied. I heard your testimony, and I believe you are. But sorry doesn't bring her back. Sorry doesn't undo what happened. No, Vextal agreed. It does not, but it's a start. Tay continued. Because you could have stayed defiant. Could have blamed us for defending ourselves. Could have refused to learn. And maybe, just maybe, the fact that you're trying to understand means others of your kind might too. Before more people die, Tay turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Commander, you're right to be afraid of us. Not because we're monsters, but because we're not. We'll fight like hell when we have to, but we'd rather not fight at all. That's what makes us dangerous. We know the true cost of war. and we pay it anyway when there's no other choice. As Vextal was taken back to his cell, he thought about those words. About the cost of war. About the price that 23 survivors had paid, and the price that 177 others had paid with their lives. That evening, Vextal began writing. His legal counsel had given him materials to prepare his defense, but Vextal wasn't interested in defending himself. Instead, he wrote an account, a warning. He titled it, "The Second I Understood What Fear Truly Is." He wrote about the attack on the New Dawn, about underestimating the colonists, about watching them fight with improvised weapons and pure determination, about the arrival of the human military, professional and controlled, about learning that humans were capable of both savage defense and civilized prosecution. He wrote about Day, who had turned a damaged ship into a fortress, about Hana, who had coordinated defenses with a broken leg, about Captain Tay, who had led his people through hell and lost his daughter, about Hyun, who had been willing to detonate a reactor, about all of them, who had chosen to fight rather than surrender. And he wrote about what came after, about Admiral Kwan's restraint, about Captain Jiwon's professionalism, about a justice system that gave even war criminals fair treatment, about a species that knew how to make war but chose to make rules instead. His final paragraph read, "I have conquered 47 worlds in my career. I have faced armies and defeated them. But I have never encountered anything like humanity. They are peaceful until threatened, at which point they become the most terrifying force in the galaxy, not because they lack mercy, but because their mercy is a choice. They could be monsters. They choose not to be. And that choice, that discipline, that control, is what makes them truly dangerous. I pray that the Kryn Empire learns from my mistake. Do not attack humans. Do not threaten their families. Do not assume their kindness is weakness, because if you do, you will learn what I learned, that humans in battle are unlike anything else in the galaxy. And the second you understand what fear truly is, will be the moment you see humans stop being peaceful and start being practical." Years later, that document would be shared throughout the Kryn Empire and beyond. It became required reading in their military academies. A cautionary tale, a lesson learned in blood and pain, and somewhere, in a human colony on a distant world, 23 survivors tried to rebuild their lives, carrying the weight of 177 ghosts and the knowledge that they had shown the galaxy what humanity truly meant. They were peaceful, but never harmless. They were kind, but never weak. They were human, and that was enough.